Hello, my name's Taryn, also known as Big Bison T on the Aliens Legacy forum. Today we're going to be looking at some accessories to finish off your Aliens Colonial Marine, either display or costume, or even just as a general collection guide on where to find all the coolest stuff. Hopefully we can answer a lot of your questions and get your guys' all fitted out with the proper kit, as they say. Now, ignoring all the accessories and bits you're seeing here, the thing we're focusing on is you're going to need some camo underneath your armor, or if you're going even Vasquez style, um, without any armor at all. The armor is not an off-the-shelf pattern that you can buy. It's nothing anybody used in the real world. It was designed for the film. It was based on the old ERDL frog and leaf pattern, so we've read, but it used its own color scheme. There's been a couple manufacturers of these replicas in the past. The only two currently going right now would be Spat at Spat Cave and Chef at Chef's Creations. They have fairly long wait times and they are not cheap, but you can order accurate camo patterns that way. Now, as an alternative, that's an older manufacturer, by the way. That's a current Spat. As an alternative, you can certainly find your own camo that's passable. My advice in that regard is to keep it true to the originals in spirit, that being no hard blacks, no green foundation. You can find khaki or tan based ones that use grays and browns. Those certainly convey the spirit of the camo pants. These here, I believe, are Walmart Wrangler cargo pants. Walmart does change up their camo patterns seasonally, so it's hard to say if these will be available when you go to Walmart, but you can probably find them on eBay and other places. Another very popular alternative is Polish desert camo. This is actually Polish Army pattern. It's got a little bit of green in there, but it's not an in-your-face green, and it primarily deals with a lot of tans and khakis, which very much fit the spirit of the original camo. So again, this is just it's not going to be an exact match. That's just an example of another manufacturer of it, an older one that's no longer in production. But I mean, as you can see in the spirit, you could do a lot worse than Polish camo, and those are available nowadays from any number of websites. And then as far as boots go, for most of the men folk, you're looking at jungle boots, old-fashioned canvas olive drab Vabram soles jungle boots. The reason I say for the men folk is because there's strong evidence that Faro, Dietrich, and Vasquez all had solid black leather boots. They were not jungle boots. In fact, Gorman and Spunkmeyer also had full black leather boots. Don't know necessarily why, but there's good evidence that Gorman had paratrooper boots due to a scene with the sole pattern. Spunkmeyer and Faro's boots are not entirely known, except that they are all black leather. And Vasquez may very well have had French Ranger boots, which are also all black leather. So just something to keep in mind. The boots we'll take a better look at in a second. Take a real quick closer look at the jungle boots worn by the majority of the Marines and the Vabram soles that go with them. That's the pattern that is, as they say, screen accurate. But do what you got to do. See, we could do a long video about just the weapons. We're going to try to hit each one quick. First, of course, is the Smart Gun, which has its own support structure of an arm, stabilizing arm, and a vest. We may end up doing a Smart Gunner Marine video later. Right now, that's just not the kind of armored Marine that we're currently discussing with the accessories. They got their own little rules. The M41A pulse rifle, iconic, glorious, everyone knows it. It is the standard rifle of the Colonial Marines, and that is probably what most people are going to lean to when they are accessorizing either a display or their own costume. And you absolutely cannot go wrong with a pulse rifle. When it comes time for you to get your pulse rifle, I highly recommend building your own, just cobbling together all the parts, be they from airsoft or from real-world components. It's just a lot of fun to try to slap one together on your own. You can be more proud of it. If you just want to buy one ready-made, of course, Spat Cave sells resin ones. They are generally static. They have no moving parts, although they could have a lit counter as an option. Spulse, as they're known, they're very popular. You could also get the E-Vike / Snow Wolf, same thing, different branding. Airsoft pulse rifle. They come ready to go. They are not as accurate. They have several deficiencies that kind of bug me, but if you want something that has moving parts and actually serves a purpose, like firing BBs, then you can't go wrong with one of those airsoft pulse rifles. The one thing I will say is avoid eBay. Almost everyone selling pulse rifles on eBay are selling you something that they tried to make themselves but decided not to keep because they weren't happy with its quality. They are straight recasters, casting off of either each other or often pulse rifles, or they are 3D printing rifles, which sounds glorious until you realize that the 3D model they used was the airsoft rifles, which again have several inaccuracies that bugged the heck out of me. So if you're going to 3D model and print it, the least they could have done is made an original print instead of, copying over something with such obvious identifying characteristics and not the positive kind. So my advice is just avoid eBay, whatever you do. Of course, the next thing is the flamethrower carried by 3 Marines, used by 5. This is a Morgan 13 kit, which has since been sold off. I believe Chef now owns these molds, and he sells them. You can find, again, on eBay, there's a couple guys selling what they call their flamethrower kits. There's at least 2 floating around on there that are not at all very accurate, but are affordable, I guess, if you want to look at it that way. There's no telling where they came from or, the quality of the resin used or the crispness of the lines. Usually, if it's cheap for a reason, because it's garbage. Again, I don't recommend buying resin cast anything off eBay, but they're out there. Of course, then you got your VP70, the father of polymer framed handguns. This is a resin cast from Spat. You can also, again, find guys on eBay overcharging for inferior quality. There are airsoft versions that exist. They're out of production at the moment, so they are, kind of rare and expensive, often over $500 each. There's also vintage dart guns. Fun little, suction cup dart guns from back in the early 90s. They were fairly popular in that frame because they also, same reason they were picked for the movie, because they look futuristic and cool. You got Vasquez's Smith & Wesson Model 39. This one is made by Matsuo. There's not a whole lot of other options for these. Those are kind of hard to find. For better or worse, they often get confused for Model 1911 45s, including by the Aliens Tech Manual. Kind of sideways way, it kind of became canon, since they believed that Vasquez had a 1911, that the 1911 is an issued sidearm for the Colonial Marines, so you can just grab any airsoft cheap one of these. I think this one was like $10. And the last little cheap alternative weapon would be SA-80. I know you're saying, but that's not on the movie. It is in the background. There's a full rack of them right next to the rack of pulse rifles in the armory. So this is a cheap alternative to a screen-accurate, although not screen-used, primary weapon. So there's just a quick rundown of your Colonial Marine weapon options. Y'all ready for the most universal screen-accurate accessories? You're looking at them. Duct tape, black, and olive drab paracord. Jeanette Golston has said in interviews that they used to literally duct tape them into their smart gun rigs. And you can see it if you find any of the photos. If you look around her midsection, it is coated in black duct tape. Also, this is what is used to hold Hudson's knife to his grenade strap, and also Hicks's lighter to his grenade strap. Hicks's shotgun has got the black duct tape wrapped around the handle. Black duct tape is everywhere, and it is screen accurate. The paracord, a little less obvious, but the paracord actually was tied around the holster to give it sort of a drop effect, so it's not actually on the on the belt in Dietrich and Frost's situations. The paracord tied into a loop was literally tied to the belt, and the hand welder went through a loop, and the hand welders were dangling off the belts, literally just with paracord loops. So the paracord to tie things on is all over the place as well, in just random places where you would think there'd be some kind of fancy technology or specialized equipment. A lot of times they were literally just tied on with paracord. So black duct tape and paracord. Very underrated, screen accurate accessories. Touch on some headwear as helmet alternatives. Of course, the primary thing that you might be wearing is a helmet with your armor. The first two hats here on the left are seen primarily on the Sulaco when people were either relaxing or prepping. The first being the most common, the old black hat with the ship patch worn by Apone front and center, but also in the background worn by Crow, Wierzbowski, and Hudson. Hudson had his backwards, but in other photos you can see the ship patch. This hat is made by Cat Diesel. As you may know, the power loader was branded as a Cat Diesel power loader, and Spunkmeyer wore this while relaxing or taking in his meeting. So Spunkmeyer had that. These two are more of a field use item. The first being the OG 507 hot weather cap from the U.S. Army. It is identical in function and form to the OG 106. The OG 106 was the earlier version with a different color olive drab. They changed the material basically from the 106 to the 507, and so there's a slightly different color to it because the material is slightly different, but the shape is identical. So there's really no way to know which our Marines were wearing. Those being Gorman and Drake wore one backwards. In my mind, it was probably the 507 because they were a contemporary item that would have been much easier to find versus the Vietnam era 106s. But you never know. Maybe if they're hitting surplus stores, the older model might have been what they had. But they're identical in function regardless. The cooler one here, worn by Hicks after the Hive battle, worn at times by Vasquez, worn at times by Ripley, worn very early by Gorman, is a Raycall headset. These guys are a lot of fun and they're very cool. The only problem is they are also the headsets worn by Chewie and Han flying the Millennium Falcon. So as far as finding originals go, you are competing with the Star Wars crowd. So the prices have gotten a bit silly. Now you can get resin replicas from, of course, Chef and Spat, and occasionally a few other places. Always keep an eye out for the originals on the secondary market. But any of these are certainly passable alternatives to a helmet if you want to avoid the heat and the weight, especially in summer months while out trooping or just setting up alternative displays. Real quick hitter, helmet band. Totally optional. I included one in the build section of the helmet just because, but you don't need them. Apone didn't have one, Wierzbowski didn't have one. Obviously, most of the other guys did, especially guys with helmet covers. But the old helmet band is not required. But that's a cool little item. You should probably go with something in the khaki. There's plenty of those out there nowadays. They're pretty cheap. The original helmet bands were never 100% ID'd. They are quite a bit thicker than most modern headbands. But any khaki headband will look good. Of course, if we're talking accessories, if you want to be screen accurate, of course your sling is going to be hard to ignore. This is the 6-bar seatbelt webbing style olive drab sling. These slings with their British 58 webbing clips, which are very distinctive and unique. It's hard to find those clips. This is what everything was used on pulse rifles, flamethrowers, and motion trackers. So if you've got one of those things, you probably want to try to track one of these down. There are a few floating around on eBay at the moment. I don't know who's making them. I know a respected gentleman on the forum, screen name 7, plans on making them soon. The Noble, screen name Noble, on the forum has been the expert for the last 10 years, 20 years on these. He's been producing them. If one of these is not able to fit into your budget or you simply can't find it, one alternative to consider, I will discuss alternatives here, is a generic U.S. Army utility strap, or canteen strap as they say. Functionally, they are built almost the exact same. They got the slide bar, they've got the hook on its separate thing for adjustability. The hooks are not the same. The webbing is not the same. You actually can find vintage ones from the 80s that do use nylon instead of this canvas, and the nylon looks much closer in color to this, but it does not have the bars. So that's one thing to keep in mind. I'm not sure what these slings, the screen accurate ones are selling for nowadays, but I can tell you that you can get a generic U.S. Army canteen strap for about $8 to $12. And they have a very clean, professional, and official look to them. So if you are looking for a budget Marine, this is certainly a way to go. This is long enough to do everything that this does. It's not quite perfect, but it can get the job done. So as far as slings go, you could do a lot worse. Next up, we're looking at pouches. These are Noble pouches. Noble is a name I'm sure you guys have heard me say a lot over the last few videos. The idea is that this small pouch fits onto your right hip, and this pouch, the larger one, hangs over your left buttocks. I say that because that's what literally every character wearing armor did. So this is easily identifiable as something that is quote-unquote standard issue. If you've got a Marine costume planned or display, you probably want to grab some pouches. Now, the one exception is Hicks. Hicks had the large pouch over his left buttocks, but he did not have the small pouch on his right hip. But everyone else in armor, Hudson, Apone, Wierzbowski, Crow, the Works, Frost, they all had this over their right hip, and they're oftentimes, if they had something, another accessory, it would hang underneath it, like for example a holster for their VP70. We'll get to that in just a second. But everybody had two. You always have a big one on your left butt cheek and one over your right hip. Except Hicks, he only had the one. But if you're going to be a Colonial Marine in armor, you're probably going to want to find some pouches. So, of course, Noble, in my opinion, makes the best. Chef's Creations, who we say constantly, also makes them. Spat also makes them. Spat actually makes two types. One is the kind that's seen on screen, and one that is probably best described as a prototype pouch. That's the ones that on Harry Harris's Hudson armor is seen. It's got, webbing and Fastex buckles and things like that. It's very fancy, it's very nice, but it's not ever seen on screen. Spat does sell replicas of those if you want to get the prototype pouches. Again, my terminology, not theirs. But so you got 3 vendors for these. You're going to want to get yourself some pouches. If you are not feeling like dropping $60 to $80 after shipping on pouches, there's plenty of real-world alternatives. For example, this one's a little on the large side, but if you get a Condor, this is a Condor dump pouch, it's not perfect at all. In fact, it doesn't even necessarily look exactly the same. But how many people are going to know? If you put this on your left butt cheek and the normal people are walking around, how many people are going to call you out and say, oh, well, the Aliens tab didn't have a lift tab on it? Nobody's going to tell you that. You can find alternatives. For alternative to the small tab, one I've actually been letting my son use is a medic pouch from the 80s, from the old Army Alice setup. If you can find a medic pouch, it's very similar in size. It does have 2 large buttons on the front that are not screen accurate, but I mean, for a combo of, put the Condor with the medic pouch, you can have a large and a small pouch for about $20. You don't have to go hardcore all the time, every time. If you do, like I said, find one of the 3 vendors that I was talking about, or even sew your own. But you're going to want pouches. Base very briefly on this holster. This quilted pattern holster is not only ugly and awful, but it's often required. I don't know why they decided that was the way to keep their VP70s, but that's how they did it. This VP70 quilted holster was used by Gorman, by Apone across his chest, by Dietrich and Crow as a semi-drop leg holster scenario. So this VP70, as I mentioned in the weapons section, is arguably the standard sidearm of the Colonial Marines. And of course, if you've got a VP70, you got to have a holster. So the holsters are available also from the usual suspects. We're talking Chef's Creations and Spat. You can also sew up your own. Because they're so hideously ugly, they're really not hard to make yourself. It depends how handy you are with a sewing machine and if you're able to find some olive drab canvas. But yeah, it's a fun little addition if you want to get real wild about your VP70, if that's what you've decided your character needs to have. Next up, we have my most criminally underrated prop. You guys are probably thinking I'm going after a knife, but no. I am talking about the vintage 1980s Secret Agent 3-in-1 pop gun. Why am I showing you a 3-in-1 Secret Agent pop gun from the 80s? Because that is the foundation for not only the Smart Gun battery, which Vasquez hands over and promptly pulls out multiple backups out of her chest plate, but it's also what they call the belt tool. Nobody really knows what a belt tool is or what it does, but one thing that cannot be denied is that the Marines all carry them. Hudson has one on his left pelvis area. Hicks has one on his right. Apone carried no less than 3, possibly 4. It depends on if you believe the guys who say there's screenshots that he's got one on his right butt cheek. The guy's got them everywhere. On his grenade straps, on his belt, all over the place. Frost has 3. 2 on his right side belt, 1 on his left. Dietrich has 2. Crow has 2. Everyone carries these. And that's the thing that nobody wants to respect. So that's why I think this is the most criminally underrated prop, is that all the armored Marines have at least one. And the guys who you would think know the most, like Apone, carried 4, for crying out loud. So you've got, in my opinion, I'm not going to say you got to buy anything, you got to do anything, but find yourself some belt tools. These things, who knows what the heck they do. There's some great threads on the Aliens Legacy forum about what their purpose might be. But the undeniable fact is almost everybody had multiples. So get those. These are way, 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 way cooler than grenades. And I'll get to that in just a second. While we are talking about things that everyone had, all Marines, except for Gorman, of course, being an officer, had a shoulder lamp. The shoulder lamp setup is over your left shoulder, and this is something I didn't include in my armor build, but it is something that you should probably account for. You need to put the little slot system that holds the shoulder lamp into your armor, because everyone had them. Every armored Marine had them over their left shoulder, plus every smart gunner had them mounted on a separate plate from the weight-bearing vest that had the arm for the smart gun. So Spat, of course, sells these. Chef, of course, sells these. Nicotron, who is a name if you may only know from the forum, but he also has a presence on eBay, and I believe he sold his molds off to another gentleman who is selling Nicotron casts of the Colonial Marine shoulder lamp. If you can get a lamp together, I highly, highly, highly recommend it, because what do we have? 9 Marines on the ground in the film. All 9 had this. I almost put this in the required extras section of my armor build video, because it's fairly required if you're going for screen accuracy. If you're not going for screen accuracy, that's fine. Hicks did ditch his after the Hive battle, so you can say, oh, I'm a Hicks style, I don't like the extra weight. That's cool. Your costume will still totally make sense. Nobody's going to call you out. But if you're a purist and you want to get after it hardcore, then you're going to need yourself a shoulder lamp from somebody. Thing every Marine will need is a watch, unless of course you got long sleeves and nobody can see them. So the Marines on screen used Seiko Pulse Meter S234-5000 watches. There is a nice, crisp, clean shot in one of the publicity photos of Apone with the watch, and the yellow buttons were very clear. Now for the screen, they were painted black. It's totally conceivable that the S234-5010 model was used in some cases because it's already black. They wouldn't have needed to paint it. It's possible in my mind that there could have been some of each and they painted the yellow ones to all match. Regardless, this is what the Marines used. They used an OD Velcro watch strap. The one seen here is what comes on it. So I've kind of got this one in its original form, and I've did this one up screen style. This is also the same foundation used in the locator watch given to Ripley and then passed along to Newt, except they completely black it out, including blacking out most of the screen. To go with your tracker watch, you're going to want to get your rangefinder prop. And so this thing is pretty awesome. It is not cheap. This is another item made by SD Studios. As far as replicas go, you can find resin trackers, randomly on eBay, secondary market. You can occasionally find somebody doing, kind of a junk cast of just a basic one. Or you can try Stapleton Productions. Reach out to him on Facebook. I believe he's still active. He did an amazing, crisp, clean cast. This kit could probably even have real watch internals. It comes in 11 pieces, including the back panel, like you would get, the real watch could come apart, and it is hollow. This is an amazing kit for replicas if you can't find yourself an original on eBay. Of course, the originals do pop up on eBay all the time. Just make sure you're getting the right model. There's a couple different Seiko pulse meters out there, and only the S234 series are correct. Now for a little bit of something standard issue that everyone has, except very personalized. Dog tags. While not ever featured in the movie, surviving props certainly exist, and we know this is how they were made. Every character had them. Basic clear acrylic engraved with rank, first initial, last name, and Marine service number. If you want specific characters, you can buy Hollywood Collectibles Group, HCG, sells professional replicas of these. Sometimes they go on sale and sometimes they're fairly affordable. Some of the other characters are a lot harder to find, but every Marine is represented in the HCG line. If you fancy yourself a pilot, you want a Pharaoh dog tags, you want a Crow or Wierzbowski dog tags, they did everyone, not just Hicks and Hudson. Of course, those guys are also available. So if you want a character one, you can buy them from the licensed maker, or you can head over to the Aliens Legacy forum and find a couple gentlemen who will make them custom. They'll either make them to any character specific info you want, or they can actually make you very personalized ones. These are a couple that I had done. This first set was done several years ago by a member named Armorer. He has not been nearly as active lately, so I don't know if he's still doing these, but it's certainly worth a shot if you can't find anyone else. He did a pretty good job. This is a much newer set I had made for my wife with a nickname for her, not her real info. For Corsasri, I forget how you say the member's name, Corsasri. Not sure how it's supposed to be pronounced, but he is still making them. And you can certainly reach out to him on the Aliens Legacy forum, and like I said, he'll whip you up with whatever you want. Of course, just so you know, both of these guys, Armorer and Corsasri, are in England, so international shipping rates may be a little bit of a pain in the butt, but if you need it done, then they can handle it for you. As an added bonus of going over to the Aliens Legacy forum, we actually have a thread dedicated to service number registry, and so you can request and be issued your own unique individual service number. So then you can have something to put on the dog tags if you're going with either your own info, a fictional character that you've invented, or even just if you want your family to have, fun things to wear around. The kids love these things. They're definitely all available at the Aliens Legacy forum or professionally from HCG. Fun stuff. Now we're talking about two very prominent, very successful, very famous props. One is, of course, the motion tracker. This one is a resin kit made from a slush cast from a less than reputable company. I put a ton of work to make it look good. Places you can find ones that are good, period, are that Spat sells one. Nicotron has molds out there that you might find on the secondary market. I believe Chef has one. Of course, if you want an officially licensed professional product, HCG, Hollywood Collectibles Group, sells one of these. Master Replicas had the previous version that was professionally licensed and official. Both of those are, of course, excellent options. Both of those are, of course, cost a fortune. You can find resin kits from the guys I mentioned earlier for quite a bit cheaper. The hand welder here is a spat kit. I don't believe there's anybody currently making hand welders except Spat. There was a few others back in the day, but they were less than accurate. They had this oddball circle thing in the middle. So if you see one with a circle thing in the middle, just know it's probably a recast of one of the old 90s kits and is not necessarily worth your time. Now, whether you decide your character or your Marine needs one depends on, I guess, your Marine's job. So, of course, in the movie, Hicks and Hudson started with these. Hicks, of course, ditched his, like most of his gear, after the Hive battle, and it would get passed around to Vasquez and to Ripley. Hudson mostly kept hold of his. Same with the hand welders. Hicks and Hudson started with the hand welder. Hicks ditched his very quickly after the Hive battle. Hudson, for the most part, kept his. Vasquez would most prominently use the hand welder, but it's pretty easy to assume they got it from either Hicks or Hudson, who was no longer using them. So 2 Marines per squad were likely issued these items. So it's not a required item by any means, but if you want to add one to your kit, then by all means jump on it, because they are fairly iconic and definitely very cool. All of the much tougher to find items, but also the not as used items. First one being your dump pouch or bag used by the Marines. This is what Frost had to keep the magazines in prior to his demise, and what Dietrich used as her medic bag. No other Marines carried them, so it's not something that you feel like you should have to have. It's something fun if you can find one. This is a replica made by Noble. The tough part about these is I don't believe there are any current runs going on, and they're going to be hard to find one that's already, out there. And nobody else has ever made a replica, to my knowledge. A lot of people will use Haversack S6 respirator bags, British equipment, as a stand-in. A lot of people thought that's what it actually was used on screen for several years, until better photos come out from Blu-ray and such, and DVDs to show that all the extra pouches and pockets on the S6 respirator bag are not accurate. But in a pinch, that would be a cheaper alternative. This guy here is the Colony multifunction light. They were rigged up to shine and glow. In its default form, it does one or the other with its multifunction switch. Some of the variants you can find from these, because this design was very popular in the 80s, will have between 4 and 6, possibly even 7 functions. It's not really known how many functions the screen ones had, because there just aren't enough good images of it. And like I said, it was rewired to use these 2 functions simultaneously. The newer versions have ribbed ends for improved strength. The screen ones had smooth ends. So there's a bunch of different variations, and these were very common in the 80s, yet somehow they're not very common anymore. People who find these tend not to want to give them up if they know what it's from, and there's nobody making any replicas at all. So unfortunately, this is going to be a tough item to find. There are no replicas. You're just simply going to have to hunt down one of the vintage items. Fun to have if you can find one, though. Although only used by Bishop, Ripley, and the colonists, it could be argued it's not even a Marine item. So, you don't need it either. Fun to get if you can get it. Now we're going to focus on grenades. Lots of fun, these grenades, but honestly a little overrated. They are certainly iconic, with the old plunger scene and Gorman and Vasquez meeting their fate. Of course, the old bandolier full of grenades carried by Gorman in that same scene. Later, Ripley would have her own bandolier full of grenades that she tosses into the alien, to the Queen Hive. And those are all great fun, but as far as the individual grenades go, only 3 Marines even had them. Hudson didn't have any. Apone didn't have any. The only guys who had 2 grenade straps full of grenades were, of course, Frost and Wierzbowski, and they didn't make it past the first battle. Now, Hicks did have 3 of, 8 total loops, he had 3 grenades, and nobody else had any. So don't feel like you got to run out and buy a bunch of grenades, because quite frankly, the Marines didn't actually carry all that many. You got to figure, 9 guys on the ground, only 3 had grenades, and only 1 made it past the initial contact. Now, another thing made famous by Ripley is when she was gearing up the old grenade box. This is just a 12-gauge shotgun shell plastic ammo box with a paint job and some vinyl lettering. It is another thing that's fun to have, but not something you would exactly carry around. The vinyl letter kits are sold by Spat. He will sell the whole kit outright. The letters are not the most accurate font and size, but they can certainly get the job done, and frankly they're better than the ones I kind of homemade here because I couldn't get the letters small enough through traditional means. Moosh at Moosh Customs on Facebook does have a laser cut, highly accurate vinyl set, but they can be a little tricky because the cut, and by her own admission, the cuts are not super clean, so you're going to need to probably go in with a razor blade. But Moosh definitely has the most accurate vinyl letter sets if you want to outfit your own 12-gauge box. So grenades, lots of good fun. Don't feel like you need a million of them. You can get resin replicas all over eBay. Spat has very affordable resin ones. These with the metal machined ones with working plungers are from SD Studios. Again, not super cheap, but nice and fun if you want them. Quick add-on, this is not necessarily the best one. This is the housing for a German night vision goggles setup. This is the actual housing. I do not have the rest of it because it cost about $3 grand. But if you wanted a resin cast of a completed one, then Spat's your guy. These are of course the binoculars that Apone would use in the film. Only Apone had them. It's conceivable that only 1 member per squad would be issued them. So from a storyboard standpoint and from a real life standpoint, these are not all that common. You don't need these to live. If you like them, good for you. If you don't like them, you're certainly not required to carry them. This is a 100% optional piece. I'm going to try to talk about the knives without getting frustrated. This is one of the more cool props, obviously, and unfortunately is one of the most misunderstood, because I'm going to try to keep this fun instead of like a chewing out or a lecture. But a lot of people will look at the Gerber Mark II, a beautiful knife, long storied history in the military, special forces. It is, an iconic knife, and that's why a lot of people want to call it the official knife of the Colonial Marines, except that there's a couple things wrong with that. One is it's not, nothing in the show would indicate it was standard issue to anybody, because while 7 Marines carried knives, only 1 of them had a large fighting dagger. The rest of them had boot knives. This is the knife that Hicks had on his right grenade strap. Apone actually had one on his right strap under his pistol holster. Drake and Vasquez each had these knives lashed or tied to their boots, using a boot knife as a boot knife. Frost and Crow had these on their belts. These are the standard issue knives of the Colonial Marines. If you got 6 guys carrying them, it's pretty safe to assume that this would have been the standard issue. These Night Raiders, as they are referred to with the black blade, or Scale Mead Survival with the silver blade, they all have the same handle, originally from Gutman Cutlery, marketed as Explorer. They have a screw cap on the bottom that is a hollow handle to keep matches and fishing line and things like that. It is a very practical survival boot knife. They have standard short leather sheaths. If you're looking for one of these, be careful, because there's a lot of Raider knives. The Night Raider is the one you're looking for, not the Raider 1, Raider 2, or Raider 3. All of those are boot knives called Raiders, but they are not the correct one. They don't have the screw cap. That's your dead giveaway if you're looking for the right knife. So Honcho on the Aliens Legacy forum, he's not been very active lately, but he has his own website where I know that he has casts of these and he can sell them that way. You can also usually find these for $30 to $50 on eBay, because they're you know, in the 80s, these were very plentiful. That's probably one of the reasons they used them in production of the movie, because they were easy to find and they look cool. And that brings us to the next thing. Explorer also made a Gerber Mark II clone, a copy. You see, it's got the trademark trademark Explorer hilt. And as you can see, it's very similar to the Gerber Mark II. In fact, it was a blatant ripoff of the Gerber Mark II. Explorer wanted to make a cheaper alternative and capitalize on the popularity of the Gerber Mark II, and they made what they call the Explorer MM4. What MM stood for military mark. So they straight even stole the mark and the number when they made theirs. I believe they even eventually got a cease and desist letter from Gerber about it. But here's the crazy part. Hudson had the knockoff. You can tell because in some screen caps, especially during the cafeteria knife scene, you can see those trademark pointy hilt pieces as opposed to the flat angular bar style of the real Gerber. The other thing is that you can tell Hudson's knife has a darker finish to it, as is standard on the Explorer MM4. Gerber would not have a black blade until 1988, 2 years after the movie was released. Could not have been a Gerber. The other thing that is undisputable, absolutely cannot be argued, because some of you are probably nodding your head, who's this lunatic, trying to tell me Hudson didn't have a Mark II. It's the sheath. By the 80s, Gerbers had already started coming with the nylon sheaths, so you got to look back to the late 70s to get one with the leather sheath. And in it, you see the inward curved sides and a long, probably about 3 to 4 inch retaining tab with a button about offset 2 inches down from the bottom. Find any screen grab of Hudson. Some of the easiest to see ones are when he's going nuts at the end because you've got the flash making his sheath and knife crystal clear. And you will see on Hudson's knife, straight sidewalls, not curved inward, you will see a short 2-inch tab with the button set right up very near to the hilt of the knife. It is absolutely undeniable that Hudson had this Explorer MM4, not a Gerber Mark II. So the Gerbers are obviously iconic and they're cool and they should be respected and appreciated and all that stuff, but not as an aliens prop. Hudson had an Explorer MM4. Now if you think that, you know, the MM4 was playing the role of a Mark II and that they wanted you to think it was a Mark II, so the Mark II is actually what it is, kind of like how an actor portrays a soldier, then that's fine. I'm not saying throw your Mark II in the garbage. I'm just saying that if you can find the correct model, you should find the correct one, not the Gerber Mark II, because it wasn't a Gerber Mark II. And, like I said, to me, all of that's kind of moot, because this isn't a standard issue knife. This was Hudson's knife. The standard issue knife is the much less cool and much cheaper and much easier to find knife. So this is one of the rare cases where the more practical item from a movie is the one that's actually easiest to find and most affordable. Just a little food for thought, and hopefully everybody finds that as interesting as I did. But those are your knife options for your Colonial Marine. Obviously you can use any knife you want. I'm just saying if you want to go screen accurate. Finally, we're going to finish it off with the most important thing that you could possibly do with your outfit. That is personalize it. All the Marines in the movie were given the opportunity to personalize their gear, to add paint, to add graffiti, to add extra accessories that they had not thought of on their own. They put a lot of crap out on a table and they let them all pick what they wanted. Some, such as Jeanette Golston Vasquez, decided to put a line from one of her favorite poems on her breastplate, the Smart Gunner plate. Obviously, we're more focused on the Colonial Marine armor. Hudson loved these little cherry blossom knots, whatever you want to call it. There's no less than 3 that appear on his armor, one in painted form under his future wife, one under his eagle bolo tie. Being from Texas, the old bolo tie was important to him. And then the other was in his the end of his knot that he tied to his knife. Hicks did not Michael Biehn did not actually choose this. This was chosen by the previous actor who was in the role who got busted for drugs that Michael Biehn replaced. Fun story. Google that if you didn't already know about it. But that actor, previous to Michael Biehn, had chosen to lock his heart up. His heart was for no one. So they literally riveted a lock and a keypad over a heart on his armor. He also had a cool lighter that he taped into his straps. This is something that predated a lot of the custom, survival tools nowadays. It was actually a really cool lighter to compete with Zippo and things like that. But the moral of the story is make it your own. If you are copying an on-screen character, make sure you get their personalizations in line. You can find all those on the personalization thread of thealienslegacy.com. It's stickied at the very top. It's a great resource. And if you just want to be you as a character, then be you. Do whatever you think your armor needs. As you pick out the gear for your Colonial Marine, just remember, there's a lot of fun stuff out there, but the more crap you buy, the more you got to haul around. If you're just sticking it on a mannequin like this, load that guy up. It doesn't make a difference. If you plan on actually wearing this costume around with all these accessories, trust me, as somebody who knows, it can get quite tedious. You're hauling around your pulse rifle or your flamethrower, your motion tracker, your grenades are falling off, the caps are going missing, the knife is not letting you bend forward, your belt tools are starting to, get in the way. Oh, you've got your holster and your pouches, and all of those are keeping you from being able to unhook all your stuff to be able to go to the bathroom. Just trust me, sometimes, if you're actually planning on wearing it, trust me that less is more. Keep that in mind. Not saying don't collect it, not saying don't get excited about it, but just my little 2 cents on if you actually plan on wearing it.